Hello there, boys and girls, and welcome to our video lesson here over cellular transport. Okay, we're going to talk about how items move in and out of the cell. Alrighty, we're going to start off this video with a general overview of cellular needs. We're going to talk the basics regarding cellular transport, why and kind of how, and then we're going to get into passive transport. Okay, and within our review of passive transport, we'll talk about three types of passive transport in particular: diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this thing. Cells need many different items in order to survive. We've seen this back in Unit 3, the chemistry of life. We talked about the macromolecules. Okay, they kind of act as the nutrients if you want to view them in that fashion. We also need some minerals for these cells, and we definitely need water. Okay, we definitely need water. It's kind of the three main ingredients for cells in order to sustain life at that cellular level: macromolecules, minerals, and water. All three of these items assist in that cell being able to maintain, drumroll please, it's an item we talked about in Unit 1, homeostasis. Okay, that constant response to external environment by the internal environment. Okay, so internal balance to your external stimuli, external forces. Alrighty, so we need macromolecules. Our cells, I say we as in cells, our cells need macromolecules. They need minerals. They need water. How do they get in and out of the cell? Passive and active transport. The two major types of transport that we're going to look at here. Okay. Now, passive and active transport, some basic information. Again, each cell is trying to maintain homeostasis. And in review, that's internal environment responding to external environmental changes. Okay, that's what homeostasis is. The transport of these items occurs across the cellular membrane. So items like macromolecules, minerals, water, ions, whatever it is, has to enter and exit through the cellular membrane. And we defined that in our last video lesson as that selectively permeable phospholipid bilayer. Okay, so it kind of chooses what goes in and out. Not a conscious like brain choice here, okay? It's the basic chemistry behind it. Are you polar, non-polar, big, too small? Okay, I guess I flipped that around. Are you small enough? Are you too big? Okay, all basic chemistry, okay, that ends up making the choice on what can pass through freely or what has to require some energy to pass through or what cannot get through at all. Okay, believe it or not, we've already gotten through the first two video topics, all right, talking about in general what we need to enter and exit the cell, what cells need, what is transported, all right, macromolecules, minerals, water, ions, okay. And we've also looked at some of the basics. Okay, we looked at some of the basics about the structure that we are transporting items through the cell membrane. And in general, how passive and active transport are both ways that items do move into and out of the cell. Now we're going to get into passive transport. And passive transport, defined, is the movement of substances across a selectively permeable cell membrane. We could also say semi-permeable plasma membrane, all means the same thing, without the use of energy by the cell. Okay? So there's no resistance. It's passive. It doesn't require energy. All right? I always thought of myself as the aggressor, and my brother was the passive one. Okay? I was always poking and prodding, trying to get things done, and my brother Dino kind of went with the flow. All right? Didn't exert too much energy. He was the passive individual. Okay? So passive transport. The movement of materials across the cell membrane without the use of energy. Key factors in this passive transport include equilibrium and concentration gradients. We have a diagram down here in the bottom right of our screen, and you can see the CO2 is currently at a greater concentration on the inside of that cell. That blob right there is a cell, and you can see the nucleus towards the center. The oxygen gas, on the other hand, is at a greater concentration outside of the cell. We're going to look at all these here in a second. Okay? But the two major factors, equilibrium and concentration gradient, when we're talking about the movement of materials into and out of the cell without the use of energy, i.e. passive transport. A concentration gradient, being one of those two factors, is the difference in concentration of a substance across a space. Okay? So for instance, the middle school dance scenario. Boys on one side, girls on the other. A classic example of a concentration gradient. There's always maybe a couple boys in the middle, the brave ones, the brave girls in the middle dancing with an actual girl or an actual boy. Okay? And then maybe one boy that hangs out with the girls all the time, one girl hangs out with the boys. Alrighty? So the middle school dance analogy is a classic example of an actual physical, tangible concentration gradient. Okay? Boys on one side of the room, girls on the other, and then the concentration of each decreases as you go to the other sides of the room. Okay? Notice here how we've kind of got a little bit of a ramp. This is how we say things end up traveling down concentration gradients. Things move from high to low concentrations. An equilibrium is the concentration of a substance when it is equal throughout space. So for instance, we take ourselves a lump of sugar, we dissolve it inside of a beaker full of water. It initially starts off heavily concentrated in that solid cube-like state, but over time water does work on the bonds that have been holding those sugar molecules together, not the actual elements within the sugar molecule, but the sugar molecules together, okay, the hydrogen bonds. All right, before you know it, we've got sugar particles, glucose, floating evenly throughout that aqueous solution, that watery solution. Equilibrium, the concentration of a substance is equal throughout the space. So three types of passive transport. Okay, still in our topic here about passive transport, and those three types are diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. And I'll give you a second to write those down. Diffusion is when a substance moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. It moves down its concentration gradient. In order to move down the concentration gradient without the use of energy, you have to be able to pass through the cell membrane. Hence why water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, all great examples of molecules that can diffuse. Okay, they can diffuse. They can naturally go from areas of high to low concentration without any flak from the cell membrane. Okay, they pass right through. No issues whatsoever. Why no energy required? Think again of that ramp that you saw a couple of slides ago. High to low concentration. It doesn't require energy for you to sit at the top of a hill and then just start to roll down. Okay? You put yourself into a little bit of motion and you go. Alright? Same thing happening here with diffusion. It's one form of passive transport. Molecules go from high to low concentration without the use of energy until we reach a state of equilibrium. Okay? Osmosis is a special term basically just describing the diffusion of water. That's all it is. Okay? The movement of water across the cell membrane is very important for cellular health, homeostasis of the cell. The direction of the water movement depends on the concentration of water in the cytoplasm to water outside of the cell. And we're going to get to that here in a second because there's three types of solutions that we kind of describe when we're talking osmosis. Okay? Three types of water movement. And it's all based off of the concentration of water within the cell and within the solution that the cell is hanging out in. So the first movement is all about cell shrinkage. Okay? How water moves out of the cell. And we've got pictures here of a classic red blood cell. All right? If you were to take that red blood cell and put it into a solution that was not as concentrated in water. Okay, so there's more water in the cell than there is in the solution that the cell's sitting in. Water will naturally go from areas of high to low concentration, so it will leave the cell and try to get to a state of equilibrium across the entire watery environment. Okay, this causes the cell to shrink. It's losing water. It's shriveling up. All right, those solutions are considered hypertonic. Hyper meaning above average, more than usual. And tonic referring to the ions or materials that are within the watery solution. So basically we got ourselves a red blood cell in a solution that's very saturated in solute. Okay? What that solute is doesn't really matter. All that matters is the water is leaving the cell because it has to go from high to low concentration. That's naturally what it does. All right? The second type of movement is the reversal. It's when the cell is going to swell or get larger, and it's because the amount of water in the outside solution, okay, what the cell is hanging out in, is greater than what's inside of the cell. So the cell itself actually has more solute than the solution that it is sitting in. Okay? So this would be like taking a red blood cell and putting it in distilled water, just pure H2O. Over time, that cell is going to swell. The water is going to move into the cell, trying to get that entire watery solution at a state of equilibrium. We call those solutions hypotonic. Hypo meaning below average. Think of hypothermia, when you're very cold, colder than you should be. Okay? Hypo, below average. Hypotonic, below the average amount of solute within that solution in which the cell resides in. Okay? The third type of cell movement is a nice back and forth, in and out, and we call that an isotonic solution. So when the cell is in a watery environment that is almost the same level of concentration of solute and water that's inside of the cell. Okay? So water enters and exits at equal rates. That's because the cell resides in a solution that is isotonic. Think of isosceles triangle, all right? Equal sides. We call this a state of equilibrium. A state of equilibrium has been reached. We've got water entering and exiting the cell at the same rate, and it's because the amount of solute that's present inside of the cell is also roughly the same amount of solute that's present outside of the cell. The last type of diffusion is facilitated diffusion, and it's when we have one of those special proteins that we looked at in Lesson 2, one of those special proteins that's lodged inside the cell membrane, move materials in and out of the cell. So we're talking about items that are kind of too large or chemically cannot pass directly through the cell membrane without resistance. Okay? So facilitated diffusion still requires no energy. No energy is needed. Alrighty? It's just an assistant to allow some of those materials that can't pass through the cell membrane by themselves to actually pass through the cell membrane without the use of energy. Okay? Facilitated diffusion can occur through transport or carrier proteins, just more specific names to, again, that common term of a transport protein, a modified protein lodged in the cell membrane that helps move materials in and out. We also call them sometimes ion channels, and that's because these specialized transport/carrier proteins move specific ions, and each one of these proteins is ion specific. So it's only going to move potassium ions, it's only going to move calcium ions, it's only going to move chlorine ions, sodium ions. Okay? That's facilitated diffusion. There's somebody facilitating the movement. All right? If you're going to take the ACT, or if you take standardized assessments, or if you took the ASVAB, somebody was in the testing room with you facilitating the test. Same concept here with this type of diffusion. There is a middleman. There's an item there that's moving the materials, facilitating the movement. That does it for this video. Hopefully you feel a little more comfortable now about what cells need, okay? Why things need to transport into and out of the cell. Hopefully you have a general grasp on cellular transport, active and passive, okay? Why transport occurs, what's needed for it to actually occur, what items are involved, and last but not least, our third topic of the video, passive transport. The movement of materials across the cell membrane without energy. And there's three types of those: diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. Got any questions? Tweet me, email me, contact me somehow. I'll see you guys in class.